Did you know the last letter added to the alphabet was the letter J? Or that you can't hum if you hold your nose? Try it. I dare you. But don't hurt yourself. But you should try it. Or did you know that the real name for what we call a hashtag is an octothorpe? What? I mean, I know no one uses them anymore unless you're an influencer, hashtag influencer. But imagine a world where we were like, octothorpe, we should all be brushing our teeth in the morning. That's just strange. But I have an insane amount of random facts up here. I mean, you can often catch me watching all kinds of videos on all sorts of things. I'm telling you, you know how it gets sometimes? You start watching a video on something you were originally searching for, and next thing you know, you're watching a video on the history of vacuums, which is pretty interesting, if I might add. Knowing the random facts isn't the craziest part to me, but it's the fact that my brain has enough capacity to store it all, whether it's useful or not. See, our brains are very unique, and you'd be surprised with all the amounts of things that you can actually remember. From old song lyrics to some of our earliest memories, our brains hold on to certain things and don't necessarily let it go. It's helpful in terms of survival and processing our day-to-day. But in terms of forgiveness, boy, does it complicate some things. Have you ever really been hurt by somebody? Someone you trusted or someone you thought was supposed to be your ride or die? Have you ever been betrayed? Or maybe you had a family member, teacher, coach, mentor, or even a friend who said or did something that didn't sit right with you. Not only does it wound us in some way, shape, or form, but when it comes to mending those relationships, often you hear the phrase, just forgive and forget. We're told that forgiving and forgetting helps us to move forward from a situation. And I get the sentiment behind the phrase, but at times, it feels like you just have to pretend that nothing ever happened and move on. Ignore and avoid. Not only does pretending hurt us, but it also hurts our relationships with others. It results in us holding on to bitterness, envy, anger, and acting on it by seeking revenge, canceling people out of our lives, or living weighed down by our past. So what do? If it's so difficult just to forgive and forget, how do we truly go about forgiving people when we're reminded of what they did to hurt us? Let's take it to the Bible, and let's walk through the Old Testament story of Joseph. To get more context of the story, we need to first take it back a little bit to a time of family disorder. And here we have a case of some serious family drama. So let's get into it. Let me tell you about Joseph. When we're introduced to Joseph in Scripture, he's described as a 17-year-old who is the youngest of 12 sons. Not only is he the youngest, but he's also the favorite child of his father. Being the favorite child comes with its own perks, and for Joseph, it looked like getting lavish gifts from his father. For his siblings, however, this favoritism came with a great deal of jealousy, anger, and eventually, betrayal of their brother. See, Joseph was young. He was a bit prideful, but he had a good heart. And there was tension between Joseph and his brothers because of how much their father loved Joseph in particular. Tension, though, is probably a kind way to put it. The Bible tells us in Genesis 37 that Joseph's brothers actually hated him, and they never said a kind word to him. This kind of hatred would build and boil over when Joseph would tell his brothers of a dream that he had.
Guys, you wouldn't believe the dream I had last night. I had a dream that we were all out in the field, tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered and bowed low before mine. Crazy, right?
It was crazy indeed. What would transpire next would take crazy to a new level. Joseph's dream made his brothers hate him all the more. They'd hated him so much that at first, they plotted to kill him. One brother said, that might be doing a little too much. So they chose the second best option, selling their brother into slavery in Egypt. Through a series of very unfortunate events, from being enslaved to being jailed, being accused of things that he didn't do, getting his hopes up just to have them crushed, and way more in between. Joseph was in captivity from the age of 17 to about 30 years old. Yeah, you heard that right. Joseph was in captivity for almost 13 years. And then finally, he's elevated to being governor of all of Egypt. One day, while ruling in Egypt and being in the second in command to Pharaoh, there's a famine throughout the land. Hearing there's actually grain in Egypt, Joseph's brothers travel to receive grain from the man in charge of the grain distribution. None other than, yep, you guessed it, their brother Joseph, the one who they hadn't seen in 13 years. Now, Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him at first because they had no idea what happened to Joseph after they deliberately sold him into slavery. But eventually, Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers and exclaims through tears, "It's me, Joseph." And in an emotional and volatile time, Joseph chooses not only to embrace and forgive his brothers, but to take them in, give them housing and food, and take care of them. Although the family is united now, Joseph hasn't forgotten what his brothers did. How can you? When you've been hurt and betrayed, especially by people you love, it's hard to forget. But at the end of Genesis 50, Scripture shows us the full power of forgiveness when you choose to remember the right thing. At this point, Joseph's father had passed away, and Joseph's brothers are fearful that now that dad is gone, Joseph might finally take out his revenge. And something better happens. Check this out. It says starting in Genesis 50 verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, "If Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the suffering we caused him." So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before he died, your father gave a command. Say this to Joseph. Please forgive your brother's transgression and their sin, the suffering they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when their message came to him. His brothers also came to him and bowed before him, saying, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Yo, talk about forgiveness. But notice something important here. Joseph never forgot what happened. In fact, he addresses and acknowledges that his brothers planned evil against him. But he accompanies that with the fact that God used it for good. In other words, yes, you betrayed me. You hurt me. I haven't forgotten that. But I'm choosing to remember that God uses all things for good. And look at where we are now. I wouldn't be where I am and who I am had I not gone through all of that. Joseph realized that justice isn't his to serve, it's God's. There's no need for revenge and to hold on to baggage that could have easily weighed him down. What has happened, happened. And just as God forgave both Joseph and his brothers, Joseph chose to do the same and extend kindness and continual forgiveness to his brothers. God brings good out of all situations, no matter how bad it may be. And God isn't asking you to pretend that things haven't happened. He's asking that you remember that because He's good, all things will work for good, no matter how bad. See, forgiveness is choosing to remember what is versus what was. That's another way of saying that you must constantly remind yourself of what is true now versus what was the case in the past. And that isn't easy. It's not easy at all. Sometimes the emotions of what happened, they rise up again. And it feels like you're back where you were. It feels heavy all over again. And the weight of what was holds you hostage. But we can be reminded of the freedom that we have in Jesus. Remembering that we can choose to release that baggage to Him. And that He's doing a good work in and through us. I don't know what you may have been trying to forget or even avoid. But my prayer and hope is that you remember with God, you can trust that He'll walk with you, just like Joseph in this journey of forgiveness.